In the last few years, television has had some big upgrades. From absolute banana-sized budgets with shows like Severance spending around $20 million an episode, or The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power's first season reportedly costing around $465 million. For context, that's a whopping $200 million more than Peter Jackson's original The Lord of the Rings trilogy. To the cast and crew of some of these shows becoming equally as bananas, like director David Fincher's episodes of Mindhunter on Netflix, or with performances from stars like Colin Farrell in HBO's The Penguin and Apple TV's Sugar, or Jake Gyllenhaal in Apple TV's Presumed Innocent, or Winona Ryder in Netflix's Stranger Things. But how did this happen? How did TV end up with larger budgets than many films? And when were grade A performers able to take a hiatus from film to take on a role in television, coming back to film as though they never left? Because it wasn't so long ago that this type of budgeting or career fluidity existed. Television was generally lower budget and took a backseat to film when it came to the old cinematic experience. And television was often considered a career backslide for A-list actors who'd previously worked in film, being a strong indication their career was headed downhill. Or, at the very least, moving away from being a leading lad or lady on the silver screen again. So what was the exact moment it all changed? Today, I want to answer all those questions and more. And I want to do so taking you back to the year 2014. Not because that's the year my friends and family begged me to stop drinking, but because 2014 was the year these men were nominated for an Emmy. Do you notice anything about this lineup? I'll give you a moment.
A few moments later.
It's not that one of them tried to cover up his crimes by infamously pretending to be a character he played on Netflix. Though his career did slip into oblivion, it was not because of his choice to star in a television show. No, what you might observe is a group of actors who, after 2014, either pivoted into starring in films like John Hamm did with Baby Driver and the powerfully underrated Bad Times at the El Royale, or sustained their status as high-level actors like Bryan Cranston, who ultimately won for Best Actor at the Emmys that year for his performance as Walter White in Breaking Bad, before going on to star in a Godzilla movie and 2 seasons of Showtime's Your Honor. Or Jeff Daniels with films like The Martian and The Catcher Was a Spy, and shows like Netflix's ruthlessly underrated Godless and Hulu's The Looming Tower. Damn, Jeff Daniels killing it. But there's a couple of fellas in this lineup that stand a little higher than the rest. Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, who were nominated for their roles in the first season of True Detective. Matt and Woody managed to step away from film and over to television, returning to film afterwards unscathed. In fact, better than unscathed, the decision improved their status as grade A talent, proving that it doesn't matter if it's on TV or in a theater. There's a lot of different ways to skin a well-told story, contrary to what Quentin Tarantino might think.
But at the end of the day, it's all just a soap opera.
And so today, I want to start by talking about what happened as a result of True Detective's first season, discussing an episode from that season that many consider to be the greatest episode of the entire series, then closing out with a close look at the scene that altered television forever. Can you guess which episode the scene is from? Don't skip ahead. No cheating. No. It's not this scene from episode 5, albeit a very satisfying one. And no, I'm not talking about the scene with Marty and Lisa, you filthy animals. The scene I'm referring to is a 6-minute long tape from the 4th episode titled Who Goes There? So let's start at the top and work our way into the scene to see why it had such a profound effect. The show. Nick Pizzolatto's freshman project, True Detective, changed how the world viewed TV for a few reasons. It showed a TV series can hold its own when it comes to quality storytelling and altering how a narrative can be told on screen with a longer format. Pizzolatto's decision to have each season be a self-contained story allowed opportunities for actors to hop on board without the need to commit to a multi-year project. The stigma that television was the final stop before retirement from Hollywood was broken, and reaffirmed the fact that TV can be a great stepping stone to larger projects. Well, maybe not so much for Nick, not yet at least. Before director Cary Joji Fukunaga, it certainly has been, and it reframed Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey as visionaries when it came to movie stars taking on television characters and still being able to return to a thriving film career. Since True Detective's release, movie stars who have taken on the small screen include Jeff Bridges in The Old Man, Michelle Monaghan in White Lotus and Season 1 of True Detective, Kate Winslet in Mayor of Easttown, Colin Farrell as mentioned before in both The Penguin and Sugar, and technically one of the other seasons of True Detective, but we don't talk about that. Scoot McNairy, who not only has one of my favorite names in the business, but starred alongside Jeff Daniels in the show I will shamelessly promote in the hopes more people go and watch it, Godless, and Jude Law in some new Star Wars show no one asked for, just to name a few. The season. There's something crawling on me. My God. Early in the True Detective life cycle, Matthew McConaughey had actually attached himself to the project before HBO had even officially greenlit production of the show. Initially, Nick had envisioned Matthew playing the role of Marty after seeing him in The Lincoln Lawyer, but Matthew was convinced he'd be better suited for the role of Rust, stating, "I wanted to get in that dude's head. The obsession, the island of a man. I'm always looking for a guy who monologues. It's something really important as I feel I'm going into my better work." Woody Harrelson jumped on board, later saying the only reason he considered the project was because Matt McConaughey had recommended him, and they had spent a lot of time together on 2 previous comedy films. So let's zoom in a little more. Now that we know how Nick and the gang got together, what happened in Season 1 that paved the way for modern television to end up so spicy? Well, BFFs Woody and Matt were able to showcase some depth to their characters in a way that film doesn't really allow. An average script for a film usually sits between 90 and 120 pages long, while Nick's script for Season 1 of True Detective was 450 to 500 pages. This will be oversimplified, but generally, in film, when a character is introduced, the largest portion of character development happens during some type of exposition, usually in the first act, then peppered in throughout the rest of the film, with bigger chunks being fed to the audience around the middle, during the rising action phase, a term you'll want to remember for later in this video, before getting a final dose of character development at the climax, and ending with a little dribble of character D in the resolution. Again, oversimplified, but in film, all of this has to happen in 90 to 120 pages of script. Meanwhile, True Detective had nearly 500 pages to play around with Woody Harrelson's Detective Martin Hart and Matthew McConaughey's Detective Rust Cohle, absolutely drenching us with depth to both characters' development before we're even halfway through the story. It's a 450-page script, McConaughey says. You have a 180-page first act, allowing for stuff that films cut first. First act, character development. I've seen detective roles since then, and they just pale in comparison. Having that much room to slow burn the personalities of Detective Marty Hart and the unforgettable, semi-nihilist, philosophically pessimistic personality of Detective Rust Cohle meant we could get to know them without rushing for the sake of the story. Instead of 2 measly hours with Marty and Rust like we might have gotten out of a movie, we were served a whopping 8 hours with the both of them. Originally served up 1 fast hour at a time for 8 relentlessly long weeks between January and March in 2014 on HBO. How is this different? But other shows had done this type of thing before, utilizing the extra hours available on TV to tell a longer, deeper story. In fact, the other 2014 nominated actors were all on shows that were doing the exact same thing. Was it because the other shows were spread out over more episodes, and though each show might have been good, in Quentin's words, at the end of the day, it's all just a soap opera? Or maybe it was because most of the other shows were primarily shot on sets, while True Detective took advantage of shooting on location in Louisiana, allowing for a more real-world feel to the story as it was unfolding. Possible, but Breaking Bad had done something similar the same year, shooting primarily on location in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So perhaps it was the crisper, more cinematic feel of shooting the entire season on 35mm film, something even most major movies had already stepped away from at this time, having switched over to digital as an alternative, a switch Mad Men had made in 2010 and 90% of films had made by 2016. But most likely it wasn't any one thing. Instead, it was likely all of the above that heavily contributed to True Detective's edge. To build on this, I want to introduce you to something called subconscious aesthetic appreciation. Aesthetic appreciation can be defined as an admiration or appreciation of beauty. And so, subconscious aesthetic appreciation in this context is when the viewer is sensing something beautiful is happening, but might not be entirely aware of which piece of the puzzle is providing this experience. This can be something that's hitting any of the senses. Some examples might be a song you hear that you instantly fall in love with, but you can't put your finger on why, or a painting that's just a sunset with a person on a horse, but something about it pops in a way you can't entirely make sense of. Or maybe it's a smell in the air that provokes a distant memory, but you can barely make out the memory and don't even recognize the smell. Although for film and television, unless you're suffering from synesthesia like Rustcohle, you'll likely have an experience through sight and sound only. What is synesthesia, you ask?
Synesthesia. It's a misalignment of synaptic receptors and triggers, alkalis, colors, certain metallics. It's a type of hypersensitivity. One sense triggers another sense. Like sometimes I'll see a color and it'll put a taste in my mouth. A touch, a texture, a scent may put a note in my head.
So in this case, the top-notch acting and chemistry by Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, usage of real-world locations in Louisiana, like a sugarcane field outside of Erath, or the old 19th century Fort Macomb outside of New Orleans, Nick Pizzolatto's tightly told story, the powerful soundtrack, and gorgeous directing by Cary Joji Fukunaga. These things all tie together to tickle that subconscious aesthetic appreciation in a way no other TV show had done before. You are now entering conscious aesthetic appreciation. Alright, we've laid the landscape for why Detective Rust and Marty's season was a great one, and covered a lot of good reasons for it to be considered a turning point in television. But now it's time to zoom back in to the specific episode that offered the world the scene that changed everything. Before moving forward, I want to mention that there will be some spoilers ahead. So if this video has been your introduction to True Detective, hopefully the things mentioned up to this point have been enough to inspire you to go watch Season 1 on HBO. After you've caught up, come back and finish this video. If you're already caught up, then let's get going. The episode. Who Goes There was originally released on February 9, 2014 and was the fourth episode of the first season, making it the final episode before the halfway point of the 8-episode season. A standard story generally follows this format. A good movie generally accomplishes each thing you see here by the end of the film. For a show, when it follows this format, it tends to check each thing off by the time the season comes to a close. Remember earlier when I told you to keep in mind the term rising action and what it means? Well, now's the time to bust out that newfound knowledge. For this episode of True Detective, it not only fits this structure for the season, placing the episode Who Goes There in the category of rising action, but the episode has its own internal 3-part story structure along with an incredible 6-minute long cut scene that's episodic rising action overlaps with the overarching season's rising action. So let's break things down to set up the scene that absolutely hammers it home. I will be skipping over the subplots and instead be focusing on the meat and potatoes in the episode. The episode opens with Marty and Rust returning to a previous lead looking for some intel on Reggie Ledoux, who they're hoping can lead them to the man with the scars on his face. Instead, they get another man's name, Tyrone Weens, who might be able to connect them with Reggie. The two of them start to follow up on the lead and at some point split up. Russ sorting through evidence at his apartment and Marty out in the field on his own, which truthfully is a little uncharacteristic for old Marty. But while his life is tail spinning out of control, he probably thought this was an area he had control over and could do a little something about. After a few drinks and a little sneaking around, Marty tracks down the fella named Tyrone Weens, who tells him Reggie Ledoux has gone off the map. He tells him Reggie is now only cooking meth for one client, a biker gang that goes by the name Iron Crusaders. By the way, there's a couple of cool overhead night shots that happen while Marty is in pursuit of Tyrone, showcasing some of the strange beauty of the Louisiana landscape under the night sky. Marty gives Rust a call to update him on what he just learned about Reggie and the Iron Crusaders. Story-wise, this exchange of intel leads into what is known as the Inciting incident, or an event that forces the character to act. Well, as it turns out, Rust is very familiar with the Iron Crusaders. Before Rust partnered up with Detective Marty, he'd worked narcos deep undercover for the DEA task force. During that time, he actually rode with the Iron Crusaders under the name Crash and likely had some old connections he could tap into, but it was gonna require getting a little dirty. A few things happen next. Rust evolves, or devolves depending on how you want to look at it, into Crash. Rust puts an end to his sober era. Initiate heavy drinking sequence. Marty and Rust discuss what needs to happen next. Rust is going to be going undercover again, but his only source for help for this is going to be Marty. Real off-the-grid cowboy shit. Badges are useless, and if Rust gets caught, he'll probably take a bullet to the head, which, according to Rust, is better than getting strapped to a chair with a mirror in front of it and having his face cut off and cock and balls stuffed down his throat. Not sure why he thinks a bullet to the head is better than dinner and a show, but what do I know? Anyways, now that the plan is set, it's go time. Rust prepares for his mission, drinks Jameson, shoots up ink and cayenne, stares in a tiny mirror, does a few chin-ups, and starts blowing some lines. I need to mention that during this sequence in the episode, there's a decent amount of humor involved. The purpose of this is to give us a nice little break from the intensity of the episode, to loosen us up for what's to come. I mean shit, even the dark detective Rustcohle sneaks in a joke at one point. On screen, humor can be used to alleviate any dramatic pressure that's built up from before to prepare the audience for the next sequence of drama. It basically acts as a buffer between dramatic events, giving a moment of reprieve before jumping back into the intensity. A little more beautiful cinematography of Louisiana landscape before it's off to the races, and then the prep is over. Rustcohle becomes Crash again and reconnects with the Iron Crusaders at a biker bar where he meets up with Ginger. Crash wants to work out a deal with Ginger to get connected with the Iron Crusaders' drug supplier Reggie Ledoux, which should be a simple arrangement. But in classic, well-done storytelling fashion, things do not go according to plan. Ginger tells Crash he'll get him connected with his supplier if Crash helps him with a little side quest first. Rust is hesitant and tries to weasel his way out of it, saying he doesn't do A&Rs anymore, but Ginger grabs Rust by his groin, asking if he's been neutered, because from Ginger's perspective,
I embrace the outlaw life.
well, the fondling works and Rust is in. Not that he really has a choice, as Ginger seems to be Rust's only access point to finding Ledoux. Unfortunately, this means parting ways with Marty, Rust's only backup. Crash, heads over to Ginger's Casa de Swamp for some heavy drug use to prepare for a little thievery. Nothing like getting loaded right before a big rip and run. This is when Ginger brings Crash up to speed on what the game plan is. Ginger, Crash, and company are going to be heading into the Houston projects dressed as cops with a drug dealer they've kidnapped, Tiger Thomas. The plan is to use Tiger to get into the stash house, rob it, and then just head on home. Easy peasy. They'll be using one car to head into a rather large neighborhood that only has one way in and one way out. And if things go south, the plan is to just gunsling their way out of there. Very bad plan. Very good TV. Crash confirms with Ginger that if he helps out with his job, Ginger will set the meetup with Ledoux. Ginger confirms, and it's gunslinging time. Fortunately, Marty has used his fine detective skills and is posted up nearby, listening to a police radio, waiting for a call from Rust to come pick him up. A little bit of a weak point in the storytelling, but it still works for what it is. Marty hears Air 3 report to dispatch over the police radio that is hovering over the Houston projects, and the scene seamlessly cuts to an overhead view of Air 3, which we now see as a helicopter flying over Crash, Ginger, Tiger, and the other two idiots that are along for this little adventure in the Houston projects. Here's where the adventure truly begins. The scene. Just after 49 minutes into the episode, we enter into a 6-minute unbroken tracking shot, or a long take. From the moment Crash sneaks up on the dude at the front door of the stash house, we're in for a ride. The gang gets into the Casa de Stash semi-smoothly. Crash clears the house and has a moment where he awkwardly points his gun at a kid while trying to keep him safe, which is very bad gun etiquette, but I digress. Within less than 3 minutes, things go south and the plans change in real time. Crash becomes Rust once again, and kidnapping de la Ginger begins. This is also where the stakes of the cinematography get real high. The sequences that follow include moving through a backyard into another house where Rust calls Marty for a pickup at Amelia Street between 18th and 19th in 90 seconds, which turns out to be pretty close to how long the rest of the escape takes place. There's a brief fight that happens between Rust and two extras, which includes some decent choreography. Something like this is a pretty risky decision to include when trying to get this uncut scene right, especially when it's located nearly 4 minutes into the 6-minute long scene. But the risk of a lost scene doesn't stop there. Next, Ginger and Rust run their way through an entire neighborhood filled with extras and police vehicles. I actually went through this entire 6 minutes as slow as I could to try and count how many extras were involved because I couldn't find the number online. I counted 59 people, including Rust and Ginger. I'm also not proud to admit how long it took me to count all 59 people, so I will not be admitting to how long it took me to count all 59 people. Let me know in a comment down below if you come up with a different number. Hopefully it doesn't take you as long as it took me. Anyways, the camera briefly parts ways with Ginger and Rust to follow one of the gangsters from the neighborhood into the house, where we see 5 people crammed in a smoky room loading up guns before the camera pops its way out the back of the house where we're reconnected with Ginger and Rust. The shot takes only a moment, but from a storytelling angle, it sets the tone for what's happening in the neighborhood as a reaction to Rust and Ginger's tomfoolery, and from a visual angle, it is fine work and precise timing moving smoothly through to get us back with Ginger and Rust. Again, dangerous decision to attempt a shot like that. Now 5 minutes into a 6-minute shot that if there's a mistake, the whole scene needs to be reshot. If the scene ended there, it could still be considered one of the best to have ever happened on television, but Cary Fukunaga decided he wanted more. The last 30 seconds of the scene, Ginger and Rust have to climb a fence, and the shot of them doing so looks incredibly smooth, but pulling it off took a lot of creativity. In an interview with MTV, Fukunaga said, "Watching just the fences portion of the Wonder back, the camera floats over the high barrier in a movement that almost looks effortless. Getting the shot, however, was anything but. Because the location was an actual housing project, the True Detective crew wasn't allowed to take down any portion of the fence, so they had to improvise. At one point, we were going to build a ramp and the operator was going to walk up it, but that wasn't very safe. The solution ended up involving placing the Steadicam operator on an elevated jib or weighted crane, which carried him over the fence and back down to earth. After landing on the other side of the fence, Rust yanks Ginger along with him for the final stretch just as Marty arrives to pick them up. Then they're home free and the episode closes on a wide shot of the projects with a helicopter flying overhead and a shootout between gang and cops below. Roll credits. From a storytelling perspective, the start of the long take scene lands at the end of the rising action for the episode. In film, the midpoint is generally dedicated to a major plot point that's either moving the protagonist closer to or further from what they're trying to accomplish in a period of rising action. What's unique about this scene is it also closes the rising action for the season. In this case, entering the stash house is wrapping up the episode's rising action as Rust is hanging with the boys to head out for a little stash house surprise and moves us into the climax, which is the actual execution of the job. Simultaneously, this scene initiates the season's rising action as doing this job leads to Rust being able to essentially kidnap Ginger in order to get into contact with Reggie Ledoux. From a technical perspective, what Fukunaga did with the help of a powerhouse cast and crew probably didn't even register for most folks, but it tickled that subconscious aesthetic appreciation we talked about earlier. Most probably didn't know the details about what was happening, but while watching it, they knew they were witnessing something special. When you throw together everything from this season, great acting, swampy on-location vibes, powerful sound and music, a strong story, and grade A direction, it's like a hearty meal, a steak cooked medium rare with mashed potatoes and steamed veggies for a side. But Cary Joji Fukunaga's creative usage of Nick's story to produce this spicy 6-minute unbroken track shot, well, that was like Grandpa's secret seasoning, elevating the meal to perfection and changing our taste buds forever. It catapulted True Detective Season 1 into being one of the greatest on-screen experiences of all time and permanently transformed television forever. Hey, thanks for watching. I had a good old time doing a deep dive on the scene, episode, season, and show. If you enjoyed watching the video, please let me know by hitting the like button. I've given my perspective on how this scene changed television forever, but I'd like to hear some moments in television history you might consider honorable mentions in the comment section down below. Make sure to subscribe so you can catch the videos I'll do in the future. Until then, this is Ian signing off. Oh, and don't forget,
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction.